I came home from my heart doctor to find strangers changing my locks, and my own son's wife smiling through the gap, telling me this wasn't my house anymore. The locksmith was still loading his tools when I pulled into what I thought was my driveway, though the word thought carries more weight now than it did in that moment of crystalline October heat. The white van with Dallas security systems emblazoned on its side sat there like a mechanical vulture, foreign yet somehow inevitable, occupying the sacred space where I had parked my car for 36 years, the same spot where I had helped Margaret out of the car after her chemotherapy sessions, where Derek had practiced parallel parking as a teenager, where I had sat crying the morning after the funeral, unable to face the emptiness of the house. But the real shock, the moment that would later divide my life into before and after, came when I saw my own front door. That solid oak door Margaret and I had chosen together at the lumber yard on a Saturday in 1987, running our hands over different grains until we found the one that felt like home, standing wide open while a stranger in coveralls performed surgery on its heart, replacing what we had chosen with something cold and utilitarian. That is when I understood, with the clarity that comes only in moments of profound betrayal, that something was terribly, irrevocably wrong. Not just wrong in the way that pipes leak or cars break down, but wrong in the way that changes the fundamental architecture of your existence. My name is Robert Eugene Sterling. I am 74 years old, though I feel ancient in ways that have nothing to do with the calendar. I spent 35 years investigating insurance fraud for the federal government, believing I understood the mathematics of human greed, the predictable patterns of deception. I thought I had cataloged every variation of betrayal, every permutation of trust violated for money. I was catastrophically wrong, because the most devastating theft of all was unfolding in real time before my eyes, orchestrated not by strangers, but by the two people who should have been the guardians of my vulnerability, the protectors of my twilight years. I sat in my 2008 Toyota Camry, the car Margaret had insisted we buy because it was practical, reliable, the kind of car that would outlast our vanity, watching the air conditioning struggle against the October Texas heat. Like my heart struggled against the growing certainty that my world was ending. My pulse hammered against my ribs with the irregular rhythm Dr. Chen had warned me about. But this wasn't about medication or beta blockers. This was something more primitive and ancient. The animal recognition of mortal danger. The cellular memory of what it feels like when the pack turns against you. The young man working on my door couldn't have been older than 25. Moving with the unconscious efficiency of someone who had never lost anything that mattered. He possessed that particular obliviousness of youth, not cruelty. Exactly. But a kind of existential blindness to the weight his actions carried. To him, this was Tuesday afternoon. Another job, another lock changed. To me, it was the systematic dismantling of everything I had built, everything I believed I could trust. In my federal days, I had learned to read people through their work, the way they handled evidence. Signed documents, answered questions under pressure. This young man worked without guilt, without the tell-tale signs of someone complicit in deception. He was merely an instrument, a tool in someone else's carefully orchestrated symphony of betrayal. I emerged from the car, my 74-year-old knees protesting with the particular poetry of aged joints, that symphony of small betrayals the body performs as it prepares us for larger ones. The heat struck me with the force of remembrance. October in Texas, when Margaret and I used to plan our escape to cooler climates we would never visit, when we believed we had infinite Octobers ahead of us. Now there was only this October, and the gleaming new deadbolt where my familiar brass lock had been. The lock whose key I had turned perhaps 15,000 times, worn smooth by the ritual of homecoming. "Excuse me," I called out, summoning 35 years of federal authority, the voice I had used to question embezzlers and con artists, though I had never imagined I would need to use it to reclaim my own threshold. "What exactly are you doing to my house?" The kid looked up, squinting against the brutal sun, and in his expression I saw not guilt but the mild irritation of interrupted routine. This was perhaps the most heartbreaking detail of all. That my devastation was his mundane Tuesday. That the destruction of my life warranted nothing more than a moment's annoyance at having to pause his work. "Just finished the job, sir. Changed all the locks like the lady requested. Front door, back door, side gate. even the garage. She mentioned her father. In-law was experiencing some security concerns, wanted everything properly secured. He wiped perspiration from his forehead with the back of his hand, a gesture so ordinary, so human, that it seemed obscene in the context of what he had done. She is inside if you need to speak with her. Payment was in cash, so my work here is complete. Her father, in-law. The words arrived like a diagnosis of terminal illness. Accurate, devastating, and somehow anticipated even as they shattered my remaining illusions. What lady? I asked, though I was already drowning in the answer, already feeling the ground shift beneath everything I thought I understood about my family, my safety, my place in the world. Mrs. Sterling. Vanessa seemed like a genuinely caring person, really concerned about family. His words carried the unconscious irony of someone describing a performance he had mistaken for reality. Said you had been having some confusion lately, letting strangers into the house, maybe not recognizing who belonged and who didn't. Wanted everything secured for your own protection. He slammed his van doors with the finality of a coffin closing, leaving me standing on my own front walk, transformed into something I had never been before. A stranger at my own door, a visitor to my own life, an exile from my own history. Vanessa, my son Derek's wife of 4 years, the woman who had entered our grieving family with the precision of a surgeon and the patience of a spider, the woman who had held my hand at Margaret's funeral and whispered that she would always be there for me, that Derek and I would never face our sorrow alone. I approached what had been my front door for 36 years. Approached it now like a supplicant seeking audience with an unknown authority. The key I had carried for 3.5 decades, worn smooth by countless homecomings, felt suddenly foreign in my fingers. I inserted it into the new lock with something approaching reverence, as if this simple act might restore the natural order of things. It would not turn. The teeth, shaped by years of faithful service, were now useless against this foreign mechanism. For the first time since Margaret died, I had to announce myself at my own threshold. The cheerful chime Margaret had chosen, those opening notes of Claire de Lune that had welcomed us home from hospitals and vacations, anniversaries and ordinary Tuesdays, had been replaced by a harsh electronic buzz that sounded like an alarm, like a warning, like the mechanical voice of a world that no longer recognized my right to belong. Worse yet, there was now an intercom system mounted beside the door, its red LED blinking with the cold persistence of a mechanical heartbeat, watching, recording, bearing witness to my transformation from homeowner to trespasser. Yes. The voice that emerged from the speaker carried all the artificial sweetness of processed sugar, recognizable as nourishment, but somehow empty of any real sustenance. May I help you? Not Derek's voice, though I found myself listening for it in the electronic static, hoping against hope that my son would emerge to explain this nightmare, to restore the proper order of things. Instead, there was only her voice. Vanessa, the woman who had become my daughter-in-law and was now, apparently, something else entirely. Vanessa, it is Bob. What is happening here? Open this door. Oh, Bob. Her surprise bloomed through the speaker with the overripe perfection of theater, each syllable carefully cultivated for maximum effect. What are you doing here? I thought you would be settled at Sunset Gardens by now. Sunset Gardens. The words fell into my consciousness like stones into still water, creating ripples of confusion that spread outward until they touched every assumption I had made about my life, my future, my family's intentions. I live here, Vanessa. This is my house. This has been my house for 36 years. Open the door immediately. Well, that is precisely what we need to discuss, isn't it? Her voice carried the patronizing tone of someone speaking to a child who had wandered away from supervision. Derek and I have been so very worried about you, especially after Dr. Hoffman's comprehensive evaluation. You have been experiencing such confusion lately, and living independently in this large house simply isn't safe for someone in your condition. Dr. Hoffman. The name arrived without context, without memory, without any connection to my actual life. My cardiologist was Dr. Chen, a thoughtful man who had just that morning pronounced my heart stable, my mind clear, my independence intact. I had never heard of any Dr. Hoffman, yet Vanessa spoke his name with the casual authority of established fact. Vanessa, I don't know what elaborate fiction you are constructing, but open this door immediately. The door cracked open exactly 6 inches. I would later remember this detail with forensic precision, held by a security chain I had never authorized, never installed, never seen before. Through this narrow aperture, Vanessa's face appeared like something viewed through a prison cell window, and what I saw there transformed my confusion into something approaching terror. This was not the face of family concern or loving intervention. This was calculation made manifest, predation wearing the mask of care. Her eyes held the cold assessment of someone evaluating livestock, measuring value, determining utility. I had seen this expression before, in my federal career, in the faces of people who had reduced human beings to mathematics, who had learned to see victims, not as people but as resources to be harvested. "Bob, darling," she said, her voice now dripping with the kind of synthetic sympathy reserved for the mentally incompetent. "You are becoming quite agitated. This is exactly what Dr. Hoffman warned us about. The paranoid episodes, the hostile reactions when family members try to help. Your mind is playing tricks on you, making you suspicious of the people who love you most." The gaslighting was so expertly executed that for a moment I questioned my own perceptions. Had I forgotten something? Had I consented to changes I couldn't remember? But 35 years of investigating fraud had taught me to trust documentation over emotion, facts over manipulation. "Let me into my house, Vanessa. It is not your house anymore, Bob." The mask slipped completely now, revealing something that made my blood crystallize in my veins. "You signed it over to Derek and me last week. Surely you remember. You were so distressed about those men who came to the door claiming to be from the electric company. You said you couldn't trust yourself to live independently anymore, that you needed family to take control before you hurt yourself or lost everything to predators." I stared at her through that 6-inch gap, watching her manufacture a reality I had never inhabited, constructing a narrative of my incompetence with the casual efficiency of someone who had done this before. My mind reeled, not just from the audacity of her lies, but from their sophistication, their attention to detail, their careful psychological architecture. But then she produced something that stopped my thoughts entirely. A manila folder thick with official-looking documents, each one bearing the terrible legitimacy of government seals and formal language. "Look, here is the documentation, power of attorney, properly signed and witnessed. And this one, the deed transfer. You were so grateful that Derek and I were willing to assume responsibility for your care and your assets." She held up papers that looked disturbingly authentic, complete with the kinds of stamps and signatures that gave them the appearance of legal authority. Even through the 6-inch gap, even with my reading glasses in the car, I could see enough to know that the signature on those documents was not mine. I had spent 35 years examining fraudulent papers, learning to distinguish genuine signatures from even skilled forgeries. My authentic signature contained a distinctive loop in the R that resembled a figure 8. A quirk I had developed in high school and maintained for 6 decades. This version was too careful, too perfect, lacking the unconscious flourishes that made handwriting as unique as fingerprints. "That is not my signature," I said flatly. "Of course it is, honey. Look, there is even a notary stamp. Michelle Rodriguez from First National Bank. You have known her for years." Michelle Rodriguez worked at Southwest Credit Union, not First National. Another piece of evidence that this was all carefully orchestrated fraud. "Where is Derek?" I demanded. "At work, of course. Someone has to pay for all this." She gestured vaguely at the house. "My house. The taxes, the maintenance, the modifications we will need to make. This place is so outdated, Bob. That kitchen hasn't been touched since the 80s. Since 1989. Actually, when Margaret had designed it exactly the way she wanted it, with the breakfast nook where we had shared coffee every morning for 27 years until the stroke took her." "Well, Margaret's gone now, isn't she?" Vanessa continued. As if reading my mind, the casual cruelty of it hit like a physical blow. "And we have to think about the future. Derek and I are planning to start a family. This house will be perfect once we make some changes." "Over my dead body," she smiled then. And it was the most terrifying thing I had ever seen. Well, that is rather dramatic, don't you think? Besides, with your heart condition, you really shouldn't get so upset. Dr. Hoffman was very clear about that. I told you. I don't know any Dr. Hoffman, and that is exactly the problem. Isn't it? The memory issues, the confusion. Why don't you remember signing these papers? Why don't you remember Dr. Hoffman's visit? Why don't you remember agreeing to move to Sunset Gardens? The gaslighting was so textbook, so calculated, that I almost admired the craftsmanship, but there was nothing admirable about what came next. Look, Bob, she said, leaning closer to the gap, her voice dropping to a whisper. I am trying to be kind here. Derek wanted to have you removed today, but I convinced him to give you time to adjust. Sunset Gardens is a lovely facility. They specialize in memory care. I have already put down a deposit. There is nothing wrong with my memory. Then why don't you remember signing these papers? Why don't you remember Dr. Hoffman? Why don't you remember asking us to take over because you couldn't handle things anymore? Because none of it happened. I wanted to scream, but I could see the trap she was building. Get me angry, get me shouting, and suddenly I would look like exactly the kind of confused, agitated old man who needed to be institutionalized. I am calling the police, I said, pulling out my phone. Go ahead, she said smoothly. Tell them you are locked out of Derek and Vanessa Sterling's house. See how that goes? Oh, and Bob, your phone service might not be working. We had to cancel it. You kept making calls to numbers you didn't recognize, running up enormous bills. So concerning when elderly people cannot manage their finances. I looked at my phone. No service. The number I had had for 15 years was gone. This is theft, I said. Fraud, elder abuse. This is family taking care of family, she countered. And if you insist on making a scene, I will have to call Adult Protective Services. Tell them you are confused, potentially violent, a danger to yourself. Do you know how quickly they can have you placed on a psychiatric hold? 72 hours minimum. And from there, well, it is a short trip to permanent placement. I stood there. 74 years old, recently diagnosed with mild coronary artery disease, locked out of my own home by my son's wife. Everything I had worked for, everything Margaret and I had built together, stolen while I was at a doctor's appointment. But Vanessa had made one crucial mistake. She had assumed I was just another confused old man who had roll over and accept his fate. She was wrong. I had spent 35 years tracking down people who thought they were smarter than the system, who thought they could manipulate documents, create false narratives, and disappear with other people's lives. I was about to show her exactly what happened when you tried to con a man who had made a career of catching cons. You have thought of everything, haven't you? I said quietly. I have thought of what is best for everyone. You are 74 years old, Bob. You have a heart condition. You live alone in a house that is too big for you. The logical solution is for you to move somewhere more appropriate while Derek and I make sure your assets are properly managed. Managed. She meant stolen. And if I refuse, then you will end up in the same place anyway, except it will be the lockdown ward instead of the nice section. Your choice, Bob. But either way, you are not coming back into this house. I looked at her through that 6-inch gap. This woman who had married my son and systematically planned my destruction. She had studied me, learned my vulnerabilities, identified exactly where to cut for maximum damage. But she had made one fatal error. She had assumed that 35 years of federal law enforcement experience would just evaporate because I had turned 74. I will see you in court, Vanessa. With what lawyer? Pay how? Your accounts are frozen. Bob, credit cards canceled. You have what is in your wallet. And that is it. As it happened, I had $38 and some change. But what Vanessa didn't know was that old federal agents develop certain habits. Backup plans. Emergency protocols. Hidden resources. What she also didn't know was that my daughter Jennifer was a federal prosecutor in Portland, and that I had spent the morning not just at Dr. Chen's office, but making copies of every important document I could think of, storing them in a safety deposit box Vanessa knew nothing about. What she definitely didn't know was that I had been recording this entire conversation on the voice memo app, Margaret's grandson had taught me to use. "We will see," I said quietly. She started to close the door, then paused. "Oh, and Bob, Sunset Gardens closes admissions at 5. That gives you 2 hours to get there on your own. After that, I will have to ask the police to transport you." The door slammed shut. I heard the deadbolt turn, then the chain sliding back into place. I stood on my own front porch, holding a bag of heart medication and $38 in cash, looking at the house Margaret and I had called home for 36 years. The desert sun beat down mercilessly, and I realized I was still wearing the light jacket I would put on for the air-conditioned doctor's office. But I wasn't defeated, not by a long shot. I was a federal investigator who had spent 35 years in the field. I knew how these people operated, how they thought, what mistakes they inevitably made. And Vanessa Sterling had just made her first big one. She had underestimated me. I walked back to my car, mind already working through the implications. 35 years of investigating insurance fraud had taught me that every criminal, no matter how careful, leaves traces. Documents have digital footprints. Phone calls create records. Bank transfers leave trails. Vanessa thought she had been clever, but I could already see the cracks in her scheme. First, the timing. Changing the locks while I was at a doctor's appointment wasn't coincidence. It was coordination. Someone had to know my schedule, which meant either Derek was feeding her information, or she had been monitoring me more closely than I had realized. Second, the forged documents. No matter how good they looked, forgery was still forgery. The notary stamp from Michelle Rodriguez at the wrong bank was sloppy. A real investigation would expose that in minutes. Third, the fictional Dr. Hoffman. Creating a fake psychiatric evaluation was a federal crime, and one that left paper trails everywhere. Medical licensing boards, insurance claims, appointment records. All of it would crumble under scrutiny. But most importantly, Vanessa had revealed her motive too clearly. That slip about Derek and her planning to start a family, about making changes to the house, about my outdated kitchen. It painted a picture of premeditated theft, not concerned family intervention. I sat in my car, air conditioning running, and made a mental inventory of my resources. $38 in cash wasn't much, but I had other assets Vanessa didn't know about. The safety deposit box at First Dallas Bank contained copies of every important document: birth certificate, social security card, military discharge papers, insurance policies, even my marriage certificate to Margaret. More importantly, it contained something I had been keeping for years without really knowing why. A complete backup of my federal personnel file, including security clearances and contact information for former colleagues. Old habits die hard, and maintaining networks was one of the oldest habits of all. My phone might not have service, but the car had OnStar, a feature I had complained about but never canceled. I pressed the button. OnStar Emergency Services. How can I help you? This is Robert Sterling. I need you to place a call for me. It is an emergency. Are you in immediate physical danger, Mr. Sterling? I am a victim of elder abuse and fraud. I need to contact my daughter, who is a federal prosecutor. There was a brief pause. I can connect you, sir. What is the number? I recited Jennifer's office number from memory. Some things you never forget, even at 74. Dad. Jennifer's voice came through the car speakers, sharp with concern. What is wrong? This number came up as emergency services. Jenny, I need you to listen carefully. Derek and Vanessa have stolen my house. Changed the locks while I was at the doctor. They have forged documents claiming I signed everything over to them. What? Dad, slow down. Are you saying Derek, your brother, is part of this? I saw the documents. They are claiming I have dementia, that some Dr. Hoffman evaluated me and found me incompetent. I have never met any Dr. Hoffman. The silence stretched long enough that I wondered if the connection had dropped. Then Jennifer's voice came back, but it had transformed from daughter to prosecutor. Where are you now? Sitting in my car in what used to be my driveway. They have canceled my phone service, frozen my accounts. I have $38 in a bag of heart medication. Dad, listen to me. Drive to the downtown Marriott. I am booking you a room right now on my credit card. Don't go back to the house. Don't confront them again. I am catching the next flight to Dallas, Jenny. You don't need to. Yes, I do. Dad, what you are describing isn't just theft. It is a sophisticated elder abuse scheme. And if Derek's involved, her voice trailed off. We need to move fast. They are probably planning to have you institutionalized before you can fight back. She was right. Of course, I had seen similar schemes during my federal career. Get control of the victim's assets, then eliminate the victim through legal means. Guardianship proceedings, psychiatric holds, anything to remove them from the equation permanently. Jenny, there is something else. I think Vanessa's done this before. She was too smooth, too prepared. This wasn't her first time. Then we nail her for all of it. Dad, I need you to write down everything you remember from today. Every conversation, every document they showed you, every threat they made, times, dates, exact words if you can remember them. I recorded the conversation with Vanessa. You what? Margaret's grandson taught me to use the voice memo on my phone. I was recording when Vanessa made her threats. For the first time since this nightmare began, I heard something like satisfaction in my daughter's voice. Dad, you beautiful, paranoid old man. That recording could be the key to everything. I drove to the Marriott, checking my rearview mirror constantly. Paranoia. Maybe, but justified paranoia. If Vanessa was part of a larger scheme, if she had done this before, then she had resources I didn't know about. Networks, people who specialized in making problems disappear. The hotel clerk was professionally sympathetic when I explained that the airline had lost my luggage. I didn't mention that what I would really lost was my entire life, stolen by my own son and his wife. The room was anonymous but clean, with a view of downtown Dallas that meant nothing to me. I sat on the bed and started writing, filling hotel stationery with everything I could remember. The locksmith's name, Miguel, stitched on his coveralls. The van's license plate, which my investigators' training had automatically recorded. The exact time I had arrived home, 2:15 p.m. according to my car's clock. Most importantly, I transcribed every word of my conversation with Vanessa. Her threats, her slip about planning to start a family, her admission that Derek had wanted me removed immediately. By the time I finished, I had 12 pages of handwritten notes, 12 pages that told the story of a carefully planned crime, executed with precision but fatally flawed by overconfidence. The room phone rang at 8 p.m. Jennifer. Dad, I am at DFW. I will be there in an hour. I have been making calls. We are not fighting this alone. What do you mean? I called the FBI field office here. Elder abuse that crosses state lines falls under federal jurisdiction, especially when it involves forged documents and mail fraud. I also called the Dallas County DA's office. They have a special elder abuse unit, and they are very interested in hearing about Vanessa Sterling. Apparently, your daughter-in-law has been on their radar for a while now. I felt something cold settle in my stomach. How long? Long enough to suggest this isn't her first time, Dad. They think she is part of a network targeting elderly men with assets. You might be the break they have been waiting for. A network I had suspected as much, but hearing it confirmed was different. This wasn't just personal betrayal, it was organized crime, with my own son as an accomplice. What about Derek? Jennifer's voice went flat. What about him? He is an adult who made his choice. If he is part of this, then he faces the consequences. He is your brother. He is a stranger who looks like my brother. The Derek I knew would never do this to you, to us. When Jennifer arrived, she took one look at my handwritten notes and smiled grimly. Dad, this is federal prosecutor quality documentation. You have built half their case for them. Old habits. Good habits now. Tell me about this Dr. Hoffman evaluation Vanessa mentioned. I told her everything I could remember. The claims about my confusion, the alleged security concerns, the men I would supposedly let into the house. Jennifer listened, taking her own notes, occasionally asking for clarifying questions. When I finished, she sat back with a look I recognized from courtrooms, the expression of a prosecutor who had just realized she had a slam-dunk case. Dad, they have made so many legal errors I don't know where to start. Forged power of attorney, fraudulent property transfer, identity theft, wire fraud if they have touched your bank accounts, elder abuse, criminal conspiracy. She ticked off charges on her fingers. And that is just what we know so far. What is our next move? Tomorrow morning, we meet with Detective Maria Santos from the Dallas PD Elder Abuse Unit, then FBI Special Agent Tom Wilson. By noon, we will have warrants and injunctions flying in every direction. I slept fitfully that night, waking every few hours from dreams where I was lost in my own house. Unable to find Margaret, calling for Derek, but getting no answer. The medications Dr. Chen had prescribed sat on the nightstand, and I wondered if I had lived long enough to need the refills. At 7 a.m., Jennifer arrived with coffee and the morning news on her tablet. Dad, you need to see this. The headline read, "Local woman arrested in elder abuse scheme." Below it was a photo of a woman I didn't recognize, but the caption made my blood run cold. Vanessa Martinez, also known as Vanessa Thompson, also known as Vanessa Sterling. She has used multiple names, Jennifer explained. The FBI ran her fingerprints through the system after I called yesterday. She is wanted in 3 states for similar schemes. What about Derek? Still at large, but not for long. They have issued a warrant. We met Detective Santos at the downtown police station. She was a woman in her 40s with the tired eyes of someone who had seen too much human cruelty. Mr. Sterling, she said, shaking my hand, I am sorry for what you have been through, but I want you to know that your case is going to help us shut down a network that has been operating for years. How many victims? That we know of. 14 elderly men across Texas, Oklahoma, and Arkansas. Total losses around $12 million. $12 million. 14 men like me, targeted, isolated, and systematically destroyed by people they trusted. What happened to them? Detective Santos and Jennifer exchanged glances. Dad, Jennifer said gently. 3 of them are dead. Heart attacks, strokes, 1 apparent suicide. All within months of being financially stripped. 3 dead men. Men whose hearts couldn't handle the betrayal, whose minds couldn't process the destruction of everything they had worked for. I want them all, I said quietly. Every person involved in this network. I want them all in prison. So do we. Detective Santos said, and your evidence is going to make that possible. FBI Special Agent Wilson arrived at 11, bringing with him a team of forensic accountants and cybercrime specialists. They set up in a conference room, laptops and files spreading across every surface. Mr. Sterling, Agent Wilson began, we have been tracking this organization for 18 months. They call themselves Family First. Ironic, considering what they do to families. Vanessa Sterling, real name Vanessa Martinez, is their top operator. He pulled up photos on his laptop. She is married 6 times in the past 8 years. 4 of those husbands are dead. 1 is in a memory care facility with advanced dementia. Your son Derek would have been number 7. Would have been. Past tense. Where is he? In custody as of 1 hour ago. Picked up at his office when he tried to access your frozen bank accounts. My son, in jail. Part of me had hoped, despite everything, that he was somehow innocent. That Vanessa had manipulated him, that he didn't know what he was doing. But you don't accidentally try to access stolen bank accounts. I need to know, I said. How long has Derek been involved? Was any of it real, or was he part of the plan from the beginning? Agent Wilson consulted his files based on phone records and financial documents. It appears Vanessa targeted Derek approximately 6 months before they met. She researched his background, learned about your assets, your wife's death, your health concerns. The meeting appeared accidental, but it was carefully orchestrated. And Derek initially appears to have been a genuine victim, but phone records show he was actively participating in the planning for at least the past 6 months. He helped research memory care facilities, consulted with Dr. Hoffman about the fake evaluation, even visited Sunset Gardens to make arrangements. 6 months. My son had been planning my destruction for 6 months. Detective Santos leaned forward. Mr. Sterling, I need to ask, do you have any reason to believe they might have tried to harm you physically? Vanessa's previous victims who died. The circumstances were suspicious. I thought about my heart medication, sitting unguarded in the house while Vanessa had access to everything, about the new prescriptions she had mentioned, the ones Dr. Hoffman had supposedly ordered. She mentioned new medications, I said Dr. Hoffman had prescribed something more appropriate for my condition. The room went silent. Agent Wilson made a note. We will need to test any medication found in the house. Vanessa's pattern includes gradual poisoning, increasing medications to dangerous levels, introducing substances that mimic natural causes of death. Gradual poisoning. They hadn't just been planning to steal my life. They had been planning to end it. How long do I have? I asked. Before the trials, before this is over. The criminal cases will take months, Jennifer said. But we can get emergency injunctions immediately. Freeze all assets, reverse the property transfers, get you back in your house. What about Vanessa? She is not getting bail, Detective Santos said with satisfaction. Flight risk, multiple identities, pattern of violence. She will be in county lockup until trial. And Derek. Jennifer's face went hard. He is an adult who made adult choices. He will face adult consequences. We spent the rest of the day building the case. Financial records, phone logs, witness statements. The scope of the conspiracy was staggering. Not just Vanessa and Derek, but a network of corrupt notaries, fake doctors, legal assistants, even funeral directors who helped dispose of victims who had died under suspicious circumstances. By 5 p.m., we had a stack of court orders, an inch thick. Asset freezes, property reversions, search warrants, arrest warrants, the full weight of the federal and state legal systems, focused on a woman who had thought she was smarter than everyone else. Mr. Sterling, Agent Wilson said as we prepared to leave, I want you to know that your quick thinking and detailed documentation made this possible. Most victims don't have your background, don't know how to preserve evidence, don't react fast enough to prevent the complete theft of their assets. Most victims don't have a federal prosecutor for a daughter, I replied. No, they don't. But even with Jennifer's help, your training and instincts made the difference. You should be proud. Proud. I wasn't sure I felt proud, vindicated. Maybe determined. Certainly. But not proud. Pride was something you felt when your children made good choices, when your family stayed together, when the people you loved didn't try to destroy you for money. We drove to my house. My house again, according to the court orders, in Jennifer's rental car. Police were already there, removing evidence, changing the locks back, restoring what could be restored. Detective Santos met us at the door. We have cleared the house, Mr. Sterling. It is safe to enter. We did find some things you should know about. She led us to the kitchen, where evidence bags sat on the counter. Hidden cameras in every room except the bathrooms. They were monitoring you constantly, probably for weeks. Hidden cameras. Watching my grief, my loneliness, my daily routines. Studying me like a laboratory rat. We also found these. She held up a bag of pill bottles. Your regular heart medication. But the dosages had been altered. The pills were drilled out and refilled with higher concentrations. Another few weeks of taking these, and you likely would have had a fatal cardiac event. They hadn't just been stealing my money. They had been slowly murdering me, day by day, pill by pill. Jennifer put her arm around my shoulders. Dad, it is over. They cannot hurt you anymore. But standing in my violated kitchen, looking at the evidence of their systematic plan to kill me, I wasn't sure it would ever really be over. Some betrayals cut too deep to heal completely. The house felt different now. Not just because of the missing furniture and altered paint colors, but because of what had happened within these walls. Betrayal had a presence, like smoke damage after a fire. We can restore everything, Jennifer said, reading my thoughts. New furniture, repaint the walls, put back all of Margaret's photos. It will not be the same number, but maybe that is okay. Maybe it needs to be different. That night, I slept in my own bed for the first time in 48 hours. Jennifer had driven to a furniture store and bought basic necessities, sheets, towels, a few chairs. The house was sparse but mine. I lay in the dark, listening to the familiar sounds of settling wood and running water. Somewhere across town, Vanessa sat in a jail cell, probably plotting her next move. Derek was in a different cell, maybe finally understanding what he had thrown away. Tomorrow would bring lawyers and testimony, depositions and evidence hearings. The long, grinding process of justice. But tonight, I was home. 74 years old, heart condition and all, but still standing, still here. My phone, my real phone, with service restored, buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. You think you have won, old man. But this isn't over. We have friends you don't know about. I screenshotted the message and forwarded it to Detective Santos. Even from jail, Vanessa was still making threats. Or maybe it was one of her network associates, still at large. I thought about the 3 dead men, the victims who hadn't been as lucky as I was. They had trusted the wrong people, believed the wrong promises, signed the wrong papers. Their families were left with nothing but grief and empty bank accounts. But I was different. I had fought back, I had survived, and now I had a new purpose. I was going to testify at every trial, speak at every hearing, make sure that Vanessa Martinez and every member of her network paid for what they had done. Not just to me, but to all of us, all the elderly men who had trusted the wrong people, who had been betrayed by those who claimed to love them. The next morning brought news that changed everything. Agent Wilson called at 7 a.m., his voice tight with excitement. Mr. Sterling, we have broken the case wide open. Derek's talking. He is giving us everything. Names, locations, bank accounts, methods of operation. This network is bigger than we thought. How big? 43 victims across 7 states. Total theft estimated at over $30 million. Vanessa wasn't just the top operator. She was running training camps, teaching other women how to identify and exploit elderly targets. Training camps. They had turned elder abuse into a business model, complete with instruction manuals and best practices. The casual evil of it was breathtaking. What about Derek? What kind of deal is he getting? Reduced sentence in exchange for full cooperation. He will still do time, but probably 5 to 7 years instead of life without parole. 5 to 7 years for helping to systematically murder and rob elderly men. It seemed like nothing. But I understood the mathematics of justice. Derek's testimony would put away dozens of criminals who might otherwise go free. There is more, Agent Wilson continued. We have identified the other victims, living and dead. We want to organize a group, survivors and families, to make sure this gets maximum publicity. These women operated in shadows depending on shame and isolation to keep their crimes hidden. Time to drag everything into the light. 3 weeks later, I stood on the steps of the federal courthouse in Dallas, surrounded by reporters and cameras. Beside me stood the families of the men who hadn't survived their encounters with the Family First Network. Behind me, I heard Margaret Chen, Harold Morrison's daughter, begin to cry. She had flown in from Seattle to hear the truth about her father's death for the first time. The FBI tells me this network stole over $30 million from 43 victims. But the real theft wasn't money. It was trust. It was dignity. It was the belief that family means something. The crowd was silent now, hanging on every word. Today, Vanessa Martinez and her accomplices face justice. But tomorrow, there will be others. Other networks, other predators, other families destroyed by greed. We cannot bring back the dead, but we can protect the living. I folded my prepared statement and spoke from the heart. If you are elderly and isolated, know that you are not alone. If you are a family member who has noticed changes in your loved one's finances or behavior, speak up. And if you are one of these predators watching this broadcast, know that we are coming for you. All of us. Every victim, every family, every law enforcement agency in the country. The press conference was carried live on every major network. Within hours, the FBI hotline was flooded with calls from potential victims and their families. The story that had started with a locksmith's van in my driveway had become a national conversation about elder abuse. But the real drama was yet to come. 2 days before Vanessa's trial was scheduled to begin, Agent Wilson called with news that chilled my blood. "Bob, we have a problem. Vanessa's pregnant." I nearly dropped the phone. "What? 8 weeks? Claims it is Derek's baby. Her lawyer is pushing for house arrest instead of jail time, citing health concerns for the unborn child. Derek's baby. My grandchild, carried by a woman who had tried to murder me. The cosmic cruelty of it was almost incomprehensible. That is impossible," I said. Derek was in jail. Conjugal visits. Apparently, they got married in a jailhouse ceremony last month. Makes her his legal wife, which complicates things. My son had married his co-conspirator. In jail, while facing federal charges for elder abuse and attempted murder. Agent Wilson, please tell me this doesn't change anything. It shouldn't. But her lawyer is good. He is painting a picture of a young woman led astray by an older, more experienced criminal. Claims she was afraid of Derek, that he threatened her if she didn't cooperate. I laughed, but there was no humor in it. Derek threatened her. That woman has killed 4 people that we know of. Derek was barely capable of balancing his own checkbook. I know, you know. But juries can be unpredictable, especially when there is a pregnant defendant involved. The trial began on a Monday morning in November. I had been preparing for this moment for weeks. But nothing could have prepared me for seeing Vanessa in person again. She had traded her designer clothes for a modest maternity dress. Her aggressive blonde hair for a softer brown style. Even her makeup was different. Minimal, natural, designed to make her look young and vulnerable. The transformation was masterful. This wasn't the cold predator who had locked me out of my own house. This was a frightened young woman, barely showing her pregnancy, dabbing at her eyes with tissues. Her lawyer, Marcus Webb, was everything I had expected, and worse. Expensive suit, silver hair, the kind of commanding presence that juries trusted instinctively. He had built his career defending white-collar criminals, and he was very, very good at it. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," Webb began his opening statement. "This case isn't about a criminal mastermind. It is about a vulnerable young woman who fell under the influence of a manipulative older man. Vanessa Martinez was 26 years old when she met Derek Sterling. She was recently divorced, struggling financially, looking for someone to take care of her. I wanted to object, to stand up and scream that she was 32, not 26, that she had been married 5 times, not once, that she had killed people, but I wasn't a lawyer, and this wasn't my courtroom. Derek Sterling was 51 years old, established in his career, from a wealthy family. He pursued Vanessa relentlessly, promised her security, promised her love. And then, gradually, he began asking her to do things. Small things at first, help him understand his father's finances, find out about his father's daily routine, research memory care facilities. The jury was listening intently. Half of them were women, and I could see the sympathy building in their faces. By the time Vanessa understood what Derek was really asking her to do, she was pregnant with his child. When she tried to refuse, he threatened her, told her that if she didn't cooperate, he would make sure she lost everything. Her home, her baby, her freedom. Webb paused for dramatic effect, letting his words sink in. The prosecution will paint Vanessa Martinez as a master manipulator, a cold-blooded killer who has done this before. But the evidence will show that she is actually the victim here, a victim of Derek Sterling's greed, Derek Sterling's manipulation, Derek Sterling's abuse. I felt my heart racing. This was brilliant legal strategy and complete fiction, but would the jury be able to tell the difference? The prosecution's opening was delivered by Assistant U.S. Attorney Sarah Chen, a woman in her 30s with the no-nonsense demeanor of someone who had prosecuted hundreds of financial crimes. "Ladies and gentlemen, the defense wants you to believe that Vanessa Martinez is a victim, but the evidence will show that she is actually a predator of the most dangerous kind, one who targets the most vulnerable members of our society." She clicked a remote, and a photo appeared on the courtroom screen. An elderly man with kind eyes and a gentle smile. This is Harold Morrison. He was 78 years old when he met Patricia Martinez. That is the name Vanessa was using then. Harold's wife had died 6 months earlier. He was lonely, grieving, looking for companionship. Another click. Another photo. Within a year of meeting Patricia, Harold had signed over his house, his bank accounts, and his investment portfolio. He died 3 months later of what appeared to be a heart attack. The death certificate shows elevated levels of digitalis, a heart medication that is therapeutic in small doses but fatal in large ones. The courtroom was silent except for the soft whir of the air conditioning system. Harold Morrison's death wasn't investigated because no one suspected foul play. He was old. He had heart problems. He had been acting confused lately. His death looked natural, but it wasn't. More photos appeared. William Chen, Robert Martinez, Thomas Anderson. Each one an elderly man. Each one dead within months of meeting one of Vanessa's aliases. The defense will claim that Vanessa Martinez was manipulated by Derek Sterling, but Derek Sterling has never been married before. He has no history of financial crimes. He has no expertise in forged documents or identity theft. Attorney Chen gestured toward the defendant's table, where Vanessa sat with her hands folded over her barely visible pregnancy. Vanessa Martinez, on the other hand, has been married 6 times in 8 years. She has used at least 12 different identities. She has been investigated in connection with suspicious deaths in 5 different states. This isn't a vulnerable young woman led astray. This is a professional killer who has been perfecting her technique for nearly a decade. The first witness was Derek himself, brought from the county jail in shackles and an orange jumpsuit. I hadn't seen my son since the day he was arrested, and the change in him was shocking. He had lost at least 20 pounds. His face was gaunt, and there were dark circles under his eyes that made him look 10 years older. When he took the stand, he wouldn't look at me, wouldn't look at Vanessa either. Just stared down at his hands as if the answers to all his problems were written on his palms. Attorney Chen began with basic questions: name, age, relationship to the victim. Derek's voice was barely audible, and the judge had to remind him twice to speak up. Mr. Sterling, when did you first meet the defendant? About 5 years ago, at a financial planning seminar. Who approached whom? Derek glanced quickly at Vanessa, then away. She approached me, said she was impressed by a question I had asked during the presentation. What happened next? We started talking. She was charming, beautiful. She seemed interested in my work, my family. She asked a lot of questions about my father. What kind of questions? About his health, his finances, whether he was managing okay on his own after my mother died. She seemed concerned, like she cared about him. Attorney Chen nodded. When did the defendant first suggest that your father might need help managing his affairs? A few months after we started dating. She said she had noticed some concerning things when she visited the house. Bills left unopened, medications mixed up, food spoiling in the refrigerator. Were these things actually happening? Derek's voice dropped even lower. Number I checked. Dad was managing fine, better than fine. Actually, the house was immaculate. His bills were paid on time, his finances were in perfect order. But you didn't contradict the defendant. No. I thought maybe she was seeing things I missed. She seemed so concerned, so caring. The questioning continued for 2 hours, with Derek describing how Vanessa had gradually escalated her claims about my incompetence, how she had researched memory care facilities and found the corrupt Dr. Hoffman, how she had practiced forging my signature until she could replicate it perfectly. But it was Marcus Webb's cross-examination that nearly destroyed everything. Mr. Sterling, you have entered into a cooperation agreement with the prosecution, haven't you? Yes. In exchange for your testimony, you are receiving a reduced sentence. Yes, instead of life in prison, you will serve approximately 5 to 7 years. That is what I have been told. Webb moved closer to the witness stand, his voice taking on an edge. Mr. Sterling, isn't it true that you were deeply in debt when you met my client? Derek's face flushed. I had some financial difficulties. Some difficulties. According to these credit reports, you owed over $100,000 in credit card debt. You were 3 months behind on your mortgage, and your law firm was considering termination for poor performance. I felt something cold in my stomach. This was news to me. Derek had never mentioned any financial problems. You needed money desperately, didn't you, Mr. Sterling? I was having some cash flow issues, and your father had money. Lots of money. A house worth $600,000. Investment accounts worth over $400,000. A pension worth $200,000. More than enough to solve all your problems. Derek was sweating now, his hands shaking. It wasn't like that, wasn't it? Isn't it true that you approached my client with this scheme, not the other way around? No, that is not. Isn't it true that you researched elder abuse techniques online? That you studied successful cases of adult children gaining control of their parents' assets? Attorney Chen objected, but the damage was done. The jury had heard the questions, and Derek's denials sounded weak and unconvincing. Webb continued his assault for another hour, systematically destroying Derek's credibility and painting him as the true mastermind of the plot. By the time Derek left the stand, he looked like a broken man. The prosecution's case continued with testimony from Dr. Chen about my actual medical condition, from the locksmith about the circumstances of changing the locks, from bank officials about the forged documents. Each witness was solid, professional, credible. But I could see the doubt creeping into the jurors' faces. Webb's cross-examination of Derek had planted a seed. What if the real story was different from what the prosecution claimed? The breakthrough came on day 3, when Agent Wilson took the stand. Agent Wilson, did your investigation uncover any evidence of the defendant's activities prior to meeting Derek Sterling? Yes, extensive evidence. Attorney Chen nodded. Can you describe what you found? Agent Wilson pulled out a thick file. We identified 6 previous marriages under various aliases. Patricia Martinez in Oklahoma City, where she was married to Harold Morrison, who died of apparent digitalis poisoning. Sandra Thompson in Little Rock, married to William Chen, who died of a suspicious fall downstairs. Maria Rodriguez in San Antonio, married to Robert Martinez, who died of what appeared to be a heart attack, but showed signs of consistent low-level poisoning. The courtroom was completely silent. Even Vanessa had stopped her tissue dabbing and was staring at Agent Wilson with undisguised hatred. In each case, the defendant inherited significant assets. Total estimated theft over the 6 marriages, approximately $8 million. Agent Wilson, what about the defendant's claim that she was 26 years old and inexperienced when she met Derek Sterling? False. Our investigation shows that the defendant is actually 34 years old and has been running marriage fraud schemes for at least 12 years. She is not a victim. She is a professional predator. Webb's cross-examination was vicious, challenging every piece of evidence, every identification, every connection Agent Wilson had made. But the facts were solid, documented, irrefutable. The defense case began with character witnesses, people who knew Vanessa as a sweet, caring woman who volunteered at animal shelters and donated to charity. Their testimony was sincere but irrelevant. Psychopaths are often charming to people who aren't their targets. The real fireworks came when Vanessa herself took the stand. She had been coached extensively, and it showed. Her voice was soft, vulnerable, with just a hint of an accent that made her seem more exotic and sympathetic. She wore a simple blue dress that emphasized her pregnancy, her hair pulled back in a modest ponytail. Miss Martinez, Webb began, can you tell the jury about your childhood? I grew up very poor in El Paso. My father left when I was 6. My mother worked 3 jobs just to keep food on the table. I learned early that I had to depend on myself, that I couldn't trust anyone to take care of me. It was a masterful performance, designed to generate sympathy while explaining her later behavior as survival instinct, rather than predatory calculation. When you met Derek Sterling, what was your situation? I was struggling. My divorce had left me with nothing. I was working 2 part-time jobs, living in a studio apartment, barely making ends meet. Derek seemed like a successful, stable man who could offer security. Did Derek ever discuss his father's finances with you? Constantly. He was obsessed with his father's money, always talking about how much the house was worth, how much was in the investment accounts. He resented that his father was spending money on himself instead of saving it for Derek's inheritance. I felt my hands clench into fists. This was a complete fabrication, but Vanessa delivered it with such conviction that I could see jurors nodding along. When did Derek first suggest that you help him gain control of his father's assets? About 6 months after we started dating. He said his father was becoming confused. that someone needed to step in before he hurt himself or lost everything. He asked me to visit the house, to look for signs of mental decline. And what did you find? Mr. Sterling seemed fine to me. A little lonely, maybe, but completely competent. When I told Derek this, he became angry, said I wasn't looking hard enough, that I needed to be more creative in documenting problems. The testimony continued for 3 hours, with Vanessa portraying herself as an increasingly reluctant participant in Derek's schemes. According to her story, Derek had forced her to research memory care facilities, had threatened to leave her when she balked at forging documents, had promised that his father would never actually be harmed. Miss Martinez, the prosecution has presented evidence that you have been married multiple times under different names. How do you explain this? Vanessa's eyes filled with tears. I have made mistakes. Bad marriages to men who hurt me. I changed my name each time to try to start over, to escape the abuse. I know it looks suspicious, but I was just trying to survive. What about the deaths of your previous husbands? Tragic coincidences. These were all elderly men with serious health problems. Harold had a heart condition. William had been falling frequently. Robert had diabetes and high blood pressure. I cared for all of them the best I could, but I am not a nurse. I couldn't prevent what happened. Webb's direct examination was a masterpiece of misdirection and emotional manipulation. By the time he finished, Vanessa looked like a victim of circumstances, a woman who had made poor choices but was fundamentally good. Then Attorney Chen rose for cross-examination. Miss Martinez, you testified that you have been married 6 times. Is that correct? Yes. And in each case, you inherited significant assets when your husband died. I was the legal spouse. Inheritance is normal in those circumstances. Let's talk about your first husband. Harold Morrison. You met him at a church social, correct? Yes. But you weren't actually a member of that church, were you? Vanessa hesitated. I was visiting. In fact, you researched the church specifically because you knew elderly widowers attended their grief support groups, didn't you? I was grieving too. My grandmother had just died. Attorney Chen produced a document. According to this death certificate, your grandmother died in 1987, when you were 8 years old. Harold Morrison died in 2019. Were you grieving your grandmother for 32 years? The courtroom erupted in murmurs. Vanessa's face went pale, then flushed red. I was confused about the dates, confused or lying. Webb objected, but the damage was done. Attorney Chen had caught Vanessa in a provable lie, and the jury had seen it happen. The cross-examination continued for 2 more hours, with Attorney Chen methodically destroying every aspect of Vanessa's carefully constructed story. Bank records that contradicted her claims about poverty, phone records that showed her researching elder abuse techniques months before meeting Derek, medical records that proved she had been present when each of her previous husbands had suffered their fatal accidents. By the time Attorney Chen finished, Vanessa looked like what she really was, a cold, calculating killer who had been caught in her own web of lies. The closing arguments were passionate on both sides. Webb made one final attempt to portray his client as a victim, emphasizing her pregnancy and youth. But Attorney Chen's closing was devastating, walking the jury through the pattern of predation that had left multiple elderly men dead and their families destroyed. Ladies and gentlemen, Attorney Chen concluded, this case isn't complicated. Vanessa Martinez is a serial killer who targets the most vulnerable members of our society. She is not young, she is not inexperienced, and she is certainly not a victim. She is a predator who has spent over a decade perfecting her technique. She gestured toward the defendant's table. The defense wants you to focus on her pregnancy, on her tears, on her claims of abuse. But remember, Harold Morrison, gasping for breath as Digitalis stopped his heart. Remember William Chen, lying broken at the bottom of his stairs. Remember Robert Martinez, slowly poisoned over months while she counted his money. Attorney Chen's voice rose. And remember Robert Sterling, who survived only because 35 years of investigating fraud taught him to recognize the signs. How many more would have died if he hadn't fought back? The jury deliberated for 6 hours. When they returned, their faces were grim but resolved. Has the jury reached a verdict? The foreman stood. We have, Your Honor, on the charge of conspiracy to commit elder abuse. How do you find? Guilty. On the charge of mail fraud. How do you find? Guilty. On the charge of identity theft. How do you find? Guilty. The verdicts continued for 20 minutes. Guilty on all counts. Vanessa Martinez was going to prison for the rest of her life. But the story wasn't over yet. 3 months later, I received a phone call that changed everything again. Mr. Sterling. This is Dr. Rebecca Walsh from Dallas Presbyterian Hospital. I am calling about Derek Sterling. My blood went cold. What about him? He was attacked in his cell yesterday evening. He is in critical condition. I sat down heavily. Despite everything Derek had done, he was still my son. How bad is it? Very bad. Multiple stab wounds, significant blood loss. He is asked to see you. Jennifer drove me to the hospital, both of us silent during the hour-long trip. What do you say to a son who tried to kill you? What forgiveness is possible after such a betrayal? Derek was in the ICU surrounded by machines and monitors. He looked smaller somehow, fragile and broken. When he saw me, tears began streaming down his face. Dad, he whispered. I am sorry. I am so sorry. I stood beside his bed, looking down at this stranger who wore my son's face. Why, Derek? Why did you do it? The money, he said, his voice barely audible. I was so far in debt, and she made it seem easy. She said you would never know, that you would be happier in the care facility. She said we were helping you, and you believed her. I wanted to believe her. I needed to believe her. He closed his eyes. Dad, there is something else. Something I never told the FBI. I leaned closer. What? Vanessa showed me photos of her other husbands. How they died. She said if I didn't cooperate, if I tried to back out, she would do the same thing to you and make it look like I did it. A chill ran down my spine. She threatened to kill me and frame you. She had it all planned out. She would poison you gradually, then plant evidence in my apartment. Credit card charges for the chemicals. Searches on my computer about heart medications. Fake emails where I talked about wanting you dead. She said no one would believe I was innocent. I stared at my son, seeing him clearly for perhaps the first time in years. Not a willing conspirator, but another victim of Vanessa's manipulation. Someone who had been cornered and terrorized into cooperating. Derek, why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you come to me for help? I was ashamed of the debt, of how weak I would become, and I was scared. She showed me what she had done to people who crossed her. I thought if I just went along, maybe I could protect you somehow. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet. But it was understanding. Derek had made terrible choices, but he had made them from fear, not greed. He had been as much a victim of Vanessa's predation as I was. Dad, Derek whispered, am I going to die? I looked at the monitors, at the machines keeping him alive, at the son I had lost and was maybe finding again. I don't know, I said, honestly, but if you don't, we will figure out how to move forward together. Derek survived his injuries, though he had carried the scars for the rest of his life. His cooperation with the FBI had already reduced his sentence, but his testimony about Vanessa's threats led to additional charges against her. Instead of 5 to 7 years, Derek would serve 18 months in a minimum security facility, followed by 5 years of probation. It wasn't justice exactly, but it was mercy, and sometimes mercy is more important than justice. Vanessa's baby was born in prison, a daughter she named Hope, a final act of manipulation designed to generate sympathy. The child was placed with foster parents, far away from the toxic influence of her mother's family. The Family First Network was dismantled over the following months, with 43 arrests across 7 states. The FBI estimated that the total theft exceeded $50 million, with at least 17 confirmed murders. I testified at multiple trials, speaking not just as a victim, but as a survivor with a message. Elder abuse was a growing epidemic, enabled by isolation and shame. The only way to stop it was to drag it into the light, to make it a public conversation instead of a private tragedy. Today, 3 years later, I still live in the house Margaret and I built together. I have repainted the walls, restored her garden, filled the empty spaces with new memories while honoring the old ones. Derek visits when he can, slowly rebuilding the relationship we almost lost. Jennifer moved back to Dallas to be closer to family. She left the prosecutor's office to start a nonprofit organization focused on elder abuse prevention. We work together now, traveling the country to speak at conferences and train law enforcement officers. The house is different now. Security system, cameras, reinforced locks. But it is home again. Not the same home I shared with Margaret, but a new kind of home. One built on survival instead of just love, on wisdom earned through betrayal and pain. My name is Robert Sterling. I am 70. 7 years old now, and I have learned that family isn't just about blood. It is about choice. It is about standing by each other when everything falls apart. Derek chose greed over family, then chose redemption over despair. Vanessa chose predation over humanity, then chose manipulation over truth. I chose survival over surrender, then chose forgiveness over hatred. In the end, we all get to choose who we want to be, even when we are 77 years old with a heart condition and a son who tried to kill us. Even then, we get to choose, and I choose to keep fighting, for myself, for the victims who didn't survive, for the families still being destroyed by predators like Vanessa Martinez. Because that is what family really means, not giving up on each other, even when everything seems lost. Especially then, DIL. A crowd of supporters held signs. Justice for elders. Elder abuse is murder. Family first, victims unite. Jennifer had helped me prepare my statement. 2 pages of carefully chosen words designed to honor the dead while warning the living. My name is Robert Sterling, I began, my voice carrying across the plaza. 3 weeks ago, I came home from a doctor's appointment to find my own son and daughter. In-law had stolen my house, my money, and my identity. They planned to murder me with doctored heart medication while they spent my life savings. The cameras clicked and whirred. This was the sound bite they wanted. The opening that would grab viewers' attention. But I was one of the lucky ones. I survived. 3 other men targeted by this network didn't. Harold Morrison in Oklahoma City, William Chen in Little Rock, Robert Martinez in San Antonio. They died believing their families had abandoned them, never knowing they were victims of organized crime. I paused, looking directly into the nearest camera. Elder abuse isn't a family matter. It is not a private tragedy. It is a federal crime, and it is happening right now to someone's father, someone's grandfather, someone who worked his whole life only to have it stolen by the people he trusted most. Behin.